All right, everybody. I have Josh Freeman from ProRata.ai on with me today. Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Where are you based?
I am based out of DC, although ProRata is actually based out of Pasadena.
That's what I thought. The home of Idea Labs. Is it in the same location as Idea
It
Labs
is
was?
in the home of Idea Labs. It is a Bill Gross creation.
Okay, so tell everybody out there who doesn't know Bill Gross a little bit about Bill Gross, and then we'll get into your background and go right into it.
Wonderful. So for those of you who don't know, Bill Gross is actually the person who came up with the idea of pay-per-click search back in the 90s. And after coming up with the idea, he launched a company called GoTo.com to prove it out, and then licensed to a bunch of the search providers who were around then. We all sort of forget that in 1998 there were multiple search providers. Google
Yeah.
was still in a garage somewhere. So he did that and eventually licensed to Google and eventually sold the company to Yahoo. And since then, he launched an incubator called Idea Lab Studios, and he's launched 150 companies since that time.
Pretty amazing. And I remember back in the day, I was at Idea Labs probably in the late 90s or something like that. And I remember I met with the team over there, but that's another story because we both have been doing a lot of things. And so I'm going to get right into ProRata, but just for everybody out there, I urge you to check out Josh's background because 25 years in media tech, including several years at AOL, at Discovery, you ran digital media in the US for a couple of years, chief digital officer at Science Magazine, which I thought was interesting, head of platform for Samsung Next, which was the early stage investment for Samsung Electronics, multiple startups. So you've worn a lot of different hats. So you come into this space with generative AI with deep, deep experience across media, tech, and the IP and all of that. So first, for everybody out there, just explain ProRata and what you do.
Sure. So in short, our goal at ProRata is to ensure that content owners and creators are fairly credited and sustainably compensated in the age of generative AI. From our perspective, generative AI is coming. It's transformative. It delivers significant value to consumers. But to fulfill its promise, it requires sustained access to high quality content. And that requires a business model that it provides an incentive for content owners to participate. And that's why I was so excited to talk to you, Peter. Obviously, you've been thinking and writing a lot about that lately, and we think it's critical.
And are you talking about all forms of content, all forms of media?
Yeah, so we're working with all forms of media, starting with text, where we might say that the existential threat is the most tangible and the closest. But we're able to work with images, with music, and with video as well. Essentially, what we do is we look after a generative response has been created. We have the ability to decompose that response and compare it to our databases and accurately and proportionally attribute the sources of that content. So as an example, let's imagine that you're using one of the major generative AI search engines. You ask it a question, it spits out the response. We can look in real time at that response, take it down to all of its constituent components and say, for instance, 50% of this article came from The Atlantic, 40% came from Fortune, 20% came from here. And from our perspective, it's that proportionate attribution that enables then a fair and sustainable long-term compensation model for creators.
So in something like that, proportion attribution, which is interesting, actually enabling payment, direct payment as well.
So we can do that. Our real focus is on this attribution and reporting, on becoming a third party, unbiased source of attribution and reporting so that the content owners can be consistently and transparently compensated. So obviously, from his days building GoTo.com, Bill and our tech teams know a lot about how to build the payment plumbing also.
Yeah.
Whether that's a role we'll play or not, I think we don't know. But the most important thing is trying first to establish the principle that it is possible to fairly and sustainably compensate these content owners and creators, not only when their content is used to train a model, but also when that content is used to create and generate a response. Because from our perspective, the payment for training is likely not to be sustainable. You already have Mark Zuckerberg saying from here on out, we're going to use synthetic data. But what we know even from the Google days, and what we really didn't understand or underestimated at the time, is the significant amount of value that is created on that page from creation forward. So Peter asks a question, a response is generated, especially in generative AI. The
Yeah.
vast amount of the value is created on that page.
Okay. So your company, ProRata, is not involved at all in terms of defining the economics themselves. So how much a content creator or a rights holder is paid, that's not what you do, correct?
Correct. We are to set the stage for the market. We are, in fact, launching our own answer engine in the next month. That answer engine, we announced in August an initial set of partners that included Financial Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Time, and Fortune. Universal Music Group was also part of that because we're working on music. But a key piece of that is we are paying all of our partners a 50-50 revenue share. Based on our understanding of the economics, which are pretty good, that is, we need to come up with a business model that is sustainable for all sides. And as you wrote about just this morning, it's not clear, given the costs of building and running these models, that the 70-30 of a Spotify or the 55% that YouTube pays out is sustainable. And while we would like content owners to make as much as they can, this feels like something that could be sustainable for each side of the market.
Okay. So you're coming up with your own answer engine, you said. So essentially, a competitor to the other solutions out there, like a Perplexity and others, correct?
Correct. Now, the one difference is we'll be working exclusively with content that we're licensing from our
No.
partners.
Yeah.
So no content will be coming in that's just scraped. We don't believe that it is appropriate to declare all the content out there fair use. So as we launch this, I mentioned our initial partners. We have about 30 more that'll be announced in the next 2 weeks. And we'll continue to build that because we think that's a second piece of this, a sustainable business model for licensed content.
Okay. So it's your answer engine that you call it is multimodal. So essentially, I can get a text response, I can get an image response, I can generate a video at a certain point.
Initially text only, but we'll be adding over the course of probably the next 12 to 15 months, we'll add all modes.
All modes. Okay. So that's interesting. So the way that you do it then is that you're not defining economics in the sense of like upfront payments or anything like that. What you're doing is you define this 50-50 platform. So no matter how you monetize it, that's the way you're looking at it. So the business model is that however you monetize it, 50% will go to you and 50% will go to the content owners or the rights holders. And then you apportion the rights holder 50%, you allocate it out in the way that you identified, depending on how much of the output is actually tied to the specific input, right?
That's exactly right. And in doing so, our goal is certainly to create a business there and compensate our partners directly. And also to your initial question, to put the stake in the ground and to show the market that we believe 50-50 is sustainable so that when those content owners negotiate with the LLMs to be paid for their content, there's a marker out there that is 50-50. It's not 25%, it's not 10%, it's not traffic only. They have something to point to.
Okay. So you have on the training side, so the input side, do you have a role in that? Apart from your own solution where you have your partners themselves, but on the input side for third parties, do you have any role?
We do not. So we're not, we're really focused on the output and on the RAG, and this is certainly
Yeah.
where there's a difference for the journalistic, for the continuing creation of text-based content is for search, that constant flow of new content is critical. That's where we're focused. We can't peer into the black box that is the model. And in fact, we're not even training our own model. We're doing everything with retrieval augmented generation from our partners.
Okay. So just for everybody else who out there, then on the input side, when we talk about the different deals and a lot of the litigation is on the input side, on the output side too, but there's still a little bit less of a, I think, an understanding for everybody out there who's listening to this. There's, and I've identified in my own writing, and I'm curious if you agree with this, that there's, I kind of think of it as three different potential infringements. You have the training itself on copyrighted works. And it sounds like position as a company is that that requires consent and compensation too, because that would be infringing if there's no license or consent given. Is that correct? Even though you're not involved in that part of the equation.
Yes, we believe that content owners should be compensated for the use of the content that they've invested so heavily in at all
Okay,
stages.
so that's one potential infringement there on the input side. And then on the output side, you mentioned RAG, and I've written about RAG, but I'll let you describe it a little bit more. And RAG, as I understand it, enables things like Perplexity's real-time kind of search where you get current information, like newsy kind of stuff, because it can't base its answers on too many sources because it will take too much time, and so it's an easier apportionment or allocation amongst the various source materials like Financial Times or whatever, because there's fewer of them than if it's a non-rag related kind of query that is based on thousands if not millions of works that are inside the sausage factory. Is that generally correct?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it, Peter. You say sausage factory. I generally think of it as the models are taking all that content and putting it into a blender and giving you, mama's secret recipe gazpacho, and
Yeah.
they either can't or won't tell you the ingredients of the recipe, and they certainly won't tell you the proportions of those ingredients. But on the RAG basis, and again, for folks who don't know, retrieval augmented generation is, as Peter was describing, what's done to provide the freshest content. So it's a combination of using knowledge from the model to shape a response with more recent content so that, if you recall when we all started playing around with some of the big models, they would say, I'm sorry, I don't know past my training date of X. The retrieval augmented generation is what's necessary to get around that because of the infrequency with which the models are trained. There you have a better sense of the sources, and we're seeing that with some of
Yeah.
the with some of the players, but they're still not identifying the proportions. So you don't know whether that article was created 100% from high quality sources or 10%. You don't know whether it was X% from a source you trust and Y% from a source you didn't. You have no marker of quality, and that's what we're able to do. And that's what we think is critical to enable not just sustainable, but fair compensation.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So again, like you have the input copyright infringement. That's what I would say if there's no consent compensation just on the training. There's the retrieval augmented generation, which is the RAG. And that's actually, as I understand it, a separate copy is made there. So that's arguably an infringement. And then on the output side, if there's something that's similar, sufficiently connected or close to what the input is, there's potentially another infringement there. So that's kind of the way I see it as three potential infringements. And then just for you all, you're ethically trained. So it's like from a content creator standpoint, you're doing it right because you're only training on copyrighted works and consent. You're getting consent, and then you're giving compensation, and you're making this allocation. So you're making it visible to not only the source providers, but also to those who are the users of your answer product as well. So they will
Correct.
know, because then I can make a judgment. Let's say I put in a query and it says Financial Times is 25% of the reason for this generated answer, something else is 50%. I can make my value judgment about how I see the quality of the answer. Is that right?
Absolutely. And even beyond that, as we start doing this, as we hope for other generative AI search engines, there may be time because they're drawing content out of the trained model as opposed to out of the RAG database. There might be a time when you as a consumer only see 60% of an article as attributed. That's not necessarily good or bad as a value judgment, but as you were saying, as a consumer, you should know. Do I know what, it's like food labeling. Do I know do I understand all of the ingredients of the food I'm about to eat?
Yeah. But will your, now let's put aside your answer engine, which is
Right.
ethically trained. You're still, what you're creating, this attribution model, attribution reporting model, that is for any kind of LLM that's out there. And
Correct.
so, how minutia can you actually make the allocation? Because if you're talking about a non-RAG situation where it's churning and burning, the model is churning and burning to create some sort of response, conceptually, there's thousands of sources that have been part of generating that response. So are you able to, your technology is able to break it down into every single component?
We can break down the RAG'd content, and where there are identifiable chunks that come out of the LLM itself,
Yes.
we'll be able to identify those. Where it's been fully pureed, that's where we may say, hey, X% of this response is non-attributed.
If if the whole response is pureed, as you say, then it's just non-attributable because it's
Correct.
too fractional, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's
So
less likely to happen. The more recent you're speaking of, the less likely that is to happen. Again, if it's anything that's happened post the training date, of necessity, there will be some ragged content in that response. If you're asking a question about, I don't know, the siege of Carthage, that could certainly be responded to almost entirely from the puree in the model.
okay, so I get it when it comes to like breaking news information, things like that, where we're talking about like Financial Times as an example. If a Perplexity is competing with Financial Times to be the search engine for news, that's market substitution. Like there's real harm there.
Yes.
And you're coming in to solve that kind of problem by only being ethically trained and doing the allocation. So good for you, by the way, for doing that. I understand the RAG situation. So again, for everybody out there, that's more recent, current information where you really need fresh information. But let's talk then about you mentioned that your answer engine is going to be in the image space, multimodal, so fully like all forms of media, including video. Again, I understand the ethically trained model. That alone is a reason to use you versus other LLMs out there ultimately. But since there may be less of a need for fresh information, fresh data for training and for generating the outputs when you're talking about visual stuff, does your attribution and reporting I would imagine it's the same thing, that a lot of, when we're talking about visual stuff, it could be pureed more than significant chunks are attributable to one specific source.
Yeah. Interestingly, yeah. So yes, full stop. Interestingly, our early learnings about that, though, are that in some ways, because the images or the music or the video are natively digital to begin with, in many ways, they're actually easier to identify specific features, attributes, pixels than text. There are so many dimensions to text that actually has made it harder. And again, we're further along in text than in the
Yeah.
other. That's why, when we announced in August, Universal Music Group was one of our launch partners, was to also be a design partner in really pinning down the accuracy on attribution around music. But we've seen pretty good indications that separate algorithms, but same approach in terms of looking for identifiable attributes of any generative response produces a functional result.
So are you already operational when it comes to on the tech side and on the music side, since you have a partnership with UMG, Universal Music Group out there? Tell me the state of the product itself.
Sure. So we're launching our beta of the answer engine this coming month with all of our partners. It'll be a public beta by January with a target of commercial launch in May. It will be text only, initially English language text. By second quarter, we'll be adding additional foreign language content to the mix.
And how many content sources do you have in when you go out to the private launch? And by the way, the beta launch, I want in.
Absolutely. So there should be, and people are holding me to this, between 40 and 50 major content partners announced and as part of that private launch. And we're adding more every day. We probably have, 80 to 100 in the pipeline. And I like to think of it as, every time Perplexity opens its mouth, an angel grows its wings, and three more people contact me to sign a term sheet.
I love to hear that, by the way. And okay, so you have your beta launch, which is going to be at the end of this month, you said?
Yes.
Okay, that's exciting. And then the public launch is not too distant from that. And then we talked about the business model being 50-50 in terms of the split, the allocation based on your answer model. How are you generating revenue?
So the revenue will be generated initially through advertising, and then we're looking, as anyone would, and especially anyone who spent time at AOL at what the right value proposition is to move to a subscription.
Yeah,
But we'll start with advertising, and one of the things we're looking at is what does advertising mean in a generative AI world? So we are
that's a
looking at some,
damn good question.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're looking at some non-traditional approaches to that. We're actually, honestly, we're just blessed with the technology team that we have. It's a group of very senior people who were at Microsoft a long time, who are involved in building the back end of MSN, who are involved in building the monetization platforms at Bing, and just have some really interesting and creative ideas. And then obviously Bill himself is no stranger to envisioning what new business models in a search world look like. So I think there's some interesting things we're working on for advertising.
Well, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. We've been in the same kind of search world for 30 years,
Yeah.
almost 30 years, right? Where we're just so used to a certain way of experiences like.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's the right experience. And so you have your answer engine coming out. And to your point, yeah, subscription is obvious. And there's a lot of great benefit for a subscription in terms of just motivations, incentives, all that kind of thing. But even on the advertising side, you don't need to have gazillions of advertisements like you do on a Google or anything like that. If you, it will be interesting to see how you lay that out. And that's not too far from now. So you must have some very strong ideas of where
We
that's
have some
going.
pretty good ideas, and a lot of it goes around to what's different about generative AI. It's the knowledge of context. You have a much deeper knowledge of context and context signals, so you don't need to have personal data cookies following you around to understand what's best served into a specific experience.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. So you have your answer engine that's going to be textual at first, but are you already reporting on, so not only your answer engine, because you have this attribution and reporting ability, like that's a core part of what you all do. So is that already actionable or is that live itself with some customers?
Not with third parties. So the first customer of that will be our own answer
Okay.
engine.
Okay, got it.
We are having interesting conversations, as Bill did when he started with GoTo.com. Start with some smaller players and prove it first. So first prove your own, then prove with smaller players. What's interesting is there are different regulatory environments in different places. So in Europe, there are a couple of places where consortia are starting to come together in specific verticals. Anytime you have multiple players, they want an unbiased third-party referee. So we're
Yeah.
talking about initial deployments, there, and then we'll start, we hope by next summer, to have conversations with the larger players. But as you yourself indicated, they don't have a particular incentive right now to want to pay, not only protection of bottom line, but protection of litigation positions.
Yeah, of course. But it's interesting because the licensing deals are still happening. And so when you talk about it, like, that proves the case, as I've written many times, that there is a commercial market for licensing of content for training purposes and just generative AI in general. So there's market harm by not ethically. That's happening right now. And I think that the fair use position is going to go down in flames, but you know that, and people read my stuff too, and nobody knows for sure. But I think that, like, when you look at the Andy Warhol case that I've written about, the Andy Warhol Prince case, the fundamental rationale was market substitution there. And you have to look at public policy too, because copyright's all about public policy at the end of the day. And the public policy is, like, if there can be use of copyrighted works, rights holders, without any compensation, then what are the incentives ultimately for creators in the first place? So, okay, but I want to be clear. So your answer engine, that's where you're starting off. But even are you looking to, on just the attribution reporting side, are you looking to be the neutral, objective observer outside of your own answer engine to
Yes.
be able to answer those questions for all LLM?
Absolutely. So it's our goal to, I think the best analogy anyone's given me is the role that Double Verify plays in the ad tech system, is to play that role in part so that, trust but verify, let the content owners trust, but also, given the proliferating number of LLMs, if they have to take individual feeds, individual reporting, inconsistent attribution from each of them, that becomes an enormous burden to them versus having a single source of truth that it runs to. So that's really our North Star, is to be that unbiased third-party attribution and reporting mechanism. And one of the things you'll see, and I'll share some of this with you in terms of our own design, just for our own answer engine, is a very clear, understandable attribution bar that can sit at the top of any generative response, again, multimodal, that can be a trust and safety signal to a consumer. And again, as we were talking about,
100%.
in our case, it will always show 100% attribution because we always know where our content comes from. In another provider's case, it might only show 60% attribution, and that's okay. Again, it's just, let the consumer make their decision based on the best information available.
Yeah, for sure. Look, that's exciting stuff. Is part of the reason why you live in DC because of all the conversations that are happening on Capitol Hill, and you're involved in those?
No, it's really coincidental. This is
Oh, okay.
it's just
Get on
it
the
just
hill,
happens to
like,
be
climb
when.
the steps to the Capitol if there's any. I
But
don't know.
look, we do think regulation will be part of it at the very rate. This is a lot. Our perspective on this, Peter, is there's an 18 to 24-month window for the ecosystem and the economics to shake out on this. We all think of this as sort of, the first inning of generative AI. And for the consumer, it is, but it's a lot later than that for the content owner. We're in the third or fourth
Oh
inning
yeah,
of how this shakes out. Fortunately, there are still multiple players in the market, which creates the opportunity to shift to the world, as we wish to see it, the world that, as you wrote about this morning, undoes the mistakes we made with Google, undoes the mistakes we made as content owners with Facebook. But we can't do this alone. We think that there is a regulatory aspect of this, if not an affirmative regulatory aspect, at least not having a full declaration of fair use coming out of regulators somewhere. There could be similarly a legislative, again, at least no harm, if not aid. We think that there's a litigation component of this. Obviously, we, like you, are tracking what's going on. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but I'm hopeful that your analysis is spot on. We think we'll do direct deals with some of the LLMs. And also, we think that the content owners, again, as you wrote about this morning, have to stand up for themselves. If they get picked off one by one with the promise of a great deal, 24 months from now, it's going to be too late, and there's not going to be a next deal.
yeah.
And that's why one of our goals in doing this many partnerships with this many people at this time is to say, hey, look, there is another way to do this. Believe that there is. Right now, in fact, although there's a lot of money and a lot of noise in the market, the generative search providers need your content more than you need them. So when some of them are out there saying, look, Peter, we're not going to pay you, but we're going to give you significant incremental traffic. We just know that's not true. I mean, it's literally called zero-click search. So somewhere between zero and Gartner's projections of a 25% decrease in traffic from search, we know there can't be significant incremental search. And then the other thing for content owners to consider is, even if it was true, even if these guys displace Google and provide you significant incremental traffic, well, then you've just rebuilt Google, and none of us have been very happy with that.
Yeah,
As
yeah, yeah. So what you were just describing is really on the RAG-based side, right?
Yep.
Okay, on the RAG-based side. And what this is really interesting and important things that you had said. So for you, you think that the window's closing on just the training side, forget the output that you're focused on, but just on the training side, because so much has already been, it's already all been scraped, right? And
Yes.
so the window is going to be closing there. So it sounds like you agree with me that time is not the friend for content, for rights holders to
No.
try to get licensing deals just for past crimes, essentially. You know, what we
Correct.
would call past crimes. So there's that. And so there's like a, you know, a one-time lump sum or something like that. That's what's been reported out there in terms of licensing deals to date for for training purposes. But what you've come up with is this system that is an ongoing revenue generation scheme in the world of generative AI for everything going forward. And that's so from a content creator, there's really it's not just on the input side, which most of the deals are really focused on, but it's also on the output side, like you said. And so the rights holders can negotiate the best possible deal they can right now just from the training side, but then enter into your scheme to be part of, or into your solution, not scheme, to then continue to monetize over time. And they're incentivized for you to grow because their bucket will grow right there with you. And then you allocate it and apportion it. And the other part of it is that I know that, like, but I think recall seeing like Google creating a content ID-ish kind of system like they did for YouTube. So probably a reporting allocation sort of thing, but that's a closed environment.
Correct.
You're a third party not a big tech company, not a traditional big tech company. You're a third party neutral privately held company that's created a solution. So I think arguably, and I would say this, that from a rights holder perspective, it's a good position to be in for you
Yeah.
as
It's
part of your
you know what
pitch.
it's really fun, Peter, because as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, I worked for a while for AOL. One of my colleagues worked for a while for Meta. Another worked for Google. We've all also worked on the content owner side, but we all really feel like this is a chance to make amends for some of our big tech employers of the past, and it's fun. I actually, to exactly the point you just made, I was talking to one of our CEO partners who said, "Look, we really have no idea whether you can pull it off, but God, we hope you're wildly successful."
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is a, you know me, I tell it like it is. I tell it like it is. Very strongly on behalf of the rights holders, but I also don't want to be just a gadfly. You know, as I tell people, because I'm deeply involved in this world on the overall licensing side, trying to broker solutions, try to come in with solutions, and so I like the story that you have because it is a solution that solves it's not a head in the sand about generative AI. The tech is here to stay. There's a lot of positive uses for it. And so we want to incentivize that. And then, but everybody gets paid fairly. You know, you providing the technology, but also the rights holders who enable it to have value in the first place. So that's exciting. So let's just close it up a little bit with tell us a little bit more about some of the big, you mentioned some of the deals that you struck with content creators or with the rights holders, but you just recently had a major financing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So we're very fortunate with the backers that we have. We did a seed round earlier this year, and then in August we did a Series A round led by Mayfield. It's a $30 million round. The other participants should be announced pretty soon, but it'll be a great list and some interesting additions to the board. But that funds us well through 2025 and into 2026, by which time we're showing plenty of traffic and we're able to top that up.
And how many full-time employees do you have?
I believe we're at 32 now.
Okay.
Obviously, heavily on the engineering side.
Yeah. I mean, look, the pedigree, your pedigree alone, but the pedigree of Bill Gross and sounds like others on the team. I haven't investigated that, but it sounds like people from, very significant places in the past.
So our CTO was a distinguished engineering fellow at Microsoft for 15 years. Again, built the back end for MSN, built the monetization platform for Bing. His four core lieutenants all worked for him for extended periods of time at Microsoft as well.
Yeah.
And what's great about them is the experience they bring, not only the knowledge, but also the experience that they're building things right the first time. They're taking the time to make sure that the systems and processes are there to scale and scale quickly in a way that certainly when I was a first time or early time CEO who didn't come from the tech world, I didn't know the things to do to put in place, right? Not just to avoid the technical debt, but to avoid process debt, documentation debt. It's actually important if you're preparing to scale and scale with a team that's somewhat dispersed to do that stuff right the first time.
Yeah, for sure. And then one of the companies that's in and around the space and gets a lot of traction that sounds like it's related to what you do is Tollbit. That's probably the one that's most visible because they themselves just closed a major round. I think it was something like $12 million.
24 actually.
Oh, okay, $24 million. $24 million Tollbit. So are you similar or different than Tollbit?
So it's a great question. I would see us as purely complementary to Tollbit. So what we know is in a world where none of these LLMs want to pay anything, they also don't have the bandwidth to talk to smaller providers. And in your blog post this morning and last week, you talked about the 3 tiers. Tollbit plays a critical role with tier 2. You don't have to get very far down the chain to not get your calls answered by these folks. As someone pointed out, I don't know if it's still true, but up until at least very recently, OpenAI, a company with $150 billion valuation, had a 5-person partnerships team. And so that should tell you all you need to know. So the Tollbits of the world in creating these marketplaces just play a critical role in trying to aggregate both for the LLMs, aggregate these smaller players who are hard to reach. It takes a long time, and also start creating aggregated bargaining power. Now, to us, we feel.
But let me ask you a question about that. So aggregating them for strength in numbers, but they have some kind of reporting and allocation payment part of it too, don't they?
My understanding, and again, we're actually scheduling a call with them quite soon, is a lot of it is about an understanding of who's coming to your website and taking what when, as opposed to an understanding that we're using of looking into the answers and being able to provide the proportional attribution based on the generative output. I'll know more after we have a conversation with them. But from my understanding, I see us as quite complementary, where we can play the same role in the middle, making sure that all of Tollbit's customers get fairly compensated, that we would play with a Financial Times or Atlantic.
Yeah, great. And then just to finish it up, what attracted you? Like, what brought you in? How did this happen that you came into this company, ProRata.ai? And tell me a little bit about that.
So it so often happens, it's serendipity combined with a little bit of effort and experience. So among the other things I did at AOL was help build and launch AOL Video back in 2004, 2005, where I had to negotiate deals with 35 major content companies simultaneously in a period of about 3 months. And I happened to walk into the office of a friend, Tig Savage, who was one of Steve Case's co-founders of Revolution Ventures, and he's the managing partner of Revolution Ventures, which is Steve's early stage fund.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks after he had seed funded ProRata, and we were catching up as we do once or twice a year, and I talking about my background and the things I was interested in doing, and Tig said, I need to put you in touch with ProRata. And so that's how these things happen. If you walk in 3 weeks earlier, he's not thinking about it.
Yeah.
Or 3 weeks later, he's not thinking about it. If you walk in at the right time with the right set of experiences, you can get lucky. And then, as I talked about with my wife when we decided to take this journey, you're starting with an amazing founder who identified what is a known real problem, a viable technical solution, a strong technology team, and raise the money to bring it to market. It's still a startup with all the risks that entails, but I'm not sure there's a better chance to take. And it really is mission driven. I hope that you and the listeners can hear the passion in my voice. You would hear it from Bill. You would hear it from many of our colleagues that this is a mission. There is not a lot of time left to do the things that you and I have been talking about and that you've been writing about. What we know is, in the past 2 years, these companies have already seen 25 and 30% declines in their traffic from changes to Facebook and Google algorithms, and that's before generative AI has really started to bite. So the time is short to make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I love the fact that you're ethically trained. The story here resonates with me for sure, and so I too am mission driven. And I want to see real solutions here. And the fact that you guys have the team and the credibility, plus, let's not forget, $30 million is a good start. You're up against
it's not a bad
companies, but it's a good start, and it's good pedigree of investors who are coming into it. So very cool. Good for you. And look, I'm excited to have you on. We'll continue the conversation. But thanks for joining me on this one, and thanks to everybody out there for listening. But you should definitely check out ProRata.ai because they're doing very interesting things in the space, and they are considered to be, like, the name is always bubbling up around everywhere. And there's so many players that are now playing in the generative AI space, but there's only a handful that come up every now and then, and on the more privately held side, the startup type, and you're definitely one of them. So good for you.
Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it.